Hello and welcome to episode 74 of the It's Just a Hill Cycling Podcast. I am John, and today I am here with Eliza Lawson. Eliza, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. So first, I do want to, thank you for coming. Thank you for reaching out. I sort of recently put out there that I'm doing this ride to Washington, D.C., and part of it is, to raise funds for the Transgender Law Center and the National Parks Conservation Association. You very kindly reached out and you were like, hey, parks are helpful, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about. First, could you share a bit about your background and how you became involved in studying parks and sort of their impact on our society?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of did not take a straight path. So I started in exercise physiology, working in a lab with humans, and had an opportunity to do some community-based research. And community-based research is totally different. Like in a lab, you put a human on a treadmill at 2% incline, 3.5 mets for 20 minutes. You have full control.
And they're like hooked up.
Yep. Out in a community, you tell people to do stuff, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
Right.
And I was working in like behavior change theory, and kind of got this big awakening that what's out there totally influences the decisions that we make. So, telling people to go for a walk, go for a bike ride is really hard if somebody lives in a community that is full of traffic.
Right. Not conducive
unsafe,
to that.
Right. Yeah. Not an attractive community even.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of got into this whole world of public health policy and creating communities that better support health.
Yep.
So think about complete streets, safe streets, having access to transportation, having access to food, and places for recreation. That kind of brought me into the park space.
Yeah, and so was that a passion that you had before you started studying it, or is it something that you ended up learning a lot about because you were sort of changing that path from inside a lab to outside?
Yeah, I think always kind of been interested in exercise and fitness.
Yep.
Always thought that I would go into research and work in a lab.
Okay.
And then when I was not doing that, I kind of realized there's a whole other world out here.
Yep.
And, there's so many other things that influence what it is that I'm trying to accomplish with people, like trying to help people get healthier.
Yep.
And just kind of had this love of being outside.
Right.
As a non-athletic person.
Right,
so
just enjoying the outdoors.
Yes, yeah. I was not into these big activities. I just liked being outside.
Yeah.
And so when I kind of made those connections between I can help people get healthier in the outdoors.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
It's nice. Yeah. So, it seems like, and forgive me because I'm not I like spending time outside. I like spending time on my bike. I like going to parks, whether they be state parks, national parks. To me, fresh air is it's liberating.
Yeah.
Right. But this isn't really, that's not science-based. That's not fact-based, right? That's just sort of anecdotal and what my experience is. But it seems like there's a lot of research about how spending time outdoors improves mental and physical health. Can you name some of the most compelling data points or studies that you've come across that sort of speak to that?
Yeah. So I can give you one that I think is just super interesting. So there was a study done of people in the hospital. Mm-hmm. I think they were recovering from maybe gallbladder surgery or something. Some people had rooms that faced a brick wall. Some people had rooms that faced outdoors, trees and stuff.
Yep.
And they found that the people with the outdoor view recovered a day quicker and needed less meds than the people with the wall view.
Wow.
So they weren't even outside.
That's just inside.
They were just looking at the outside.
Right.
So I'm that's super interesting. Mm-hmm. But then there's also studies of relationships between park access and physical activity and body weight and BMI. And so there's one that looked at folks who live near parks and folks who didn't live near, I would say good quality parks. Mm-hmm. And they found that the people that lived near the parks had lower BMI than the people that didn't.
Oh, interesting.
So, maybe that's from more physical activity. I'm not really sure, but there is an association there.
Right.
And then mental health too. Like you said, you just kind of feel better.
Yeah.
So there was another study, and it was during the pandemic. Remember, everybody was inside doing nothing.
Right.
Think about older adults who are already kind of removed from a lot of the social stuff that goes on in society. So they looked at older adults who live near parks and older adults who did not live near parks, and found that the folks that live near the parks reported lower depression and anxiety symptoms.
Yeah. Now, this is whether or not they're spending time at the parks. This is just because of their close proximity.
Yep, presence
Wow,
of the
interesting.
park. So they, some of these studies have looked at if people are in the parks.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
even just
Of
like
course.
being able to access the park. I'm
Right.
sure they were in the park. It kind of impacts our health. And like you said, it's stuff that we feel.
Right.
It's stuff that we just kind of.
Right. Yeah, you don't necessarily need a study to tell you that fresh air and sunlight is good for you.
Good for you.
Right?
Like, I love putting my bike on the trainer.
Yep.
I love riding my bike inside on the trainer.
Yep.
It is a completely different experience than riding my bike outside.
Sure, yeah.
I would prefer to be outside.
Right. Right. It doesn't always make sense, especially, right? I mean, we're
In the rain.
It's the first official day of spring.
Right.
But it has been a bit of a dreary winter here in
Yes.
New England. And I personally see it affecting me, you know, like not being able to get outside. I see the trainer as a means to an end.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It keeps me in, at least somewhat physical form so that when the nicer weather comes around, I'm getting outside and it's not like I haven't moved my legs for months. But to me, it is a very, very different, beast, or a very different positive reaction, to being outside. So we sort of talked about how, you mentioned that like some communities, they might be like more cluttered than others. There might not be as many open spaces for people to exist in, right? Maybe that's just because there aren't the right spaces, whether they be parks or bike paths or whatever, right? And so are there ways that like parks can help bridge the gaps between different socioeconomic groups? Because that's what happens too, right? People who live in like more dense, let's say urban areas, they are like living on top of each other a little bit more than people like me who are here in the middle of the woods, right? But like, how do we help those people find open spaces and bringing like more diverse communities together? Because in a place like if you take Providence, for example, very diverse city, right? There are parks, there are places in Providence that are a little bit more, let's say, low income than others, but it is a relatively small city.
Yep.
People can access the same parks, in a relatively short amount of time, let's say, right? Let's say it's a nice day and they can walk to a park. But how do parks help bring those types of groups together? Because to me, that's a big thing, sort of, not like it needs to be political, but like reaching across the aisle, if you will, between socioeconomic tiers. Parks must help that, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I think first, like, you go to a park and you cross paths with all different kinds of people.
Right.
You see all different kinds of people. And I think that in and of itself is kind of interesting. You never know who you're going to encounter in a park.
Yeah.
Some communities will use parks to hold programs that are intentionally bringing people together. So there's like some stuff with like intergenerational connections where you bring older folks and younger folks together for like really specific purposes of building that connection for each other. Like older folks have a lot to contribute.
Yeah.
And share with younger people, and younger people have a lot that they can do with older folks. So some of those are really intentional, and some of them are not. Like youth soccer.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So like you have kids, they go to a youth soccer event. You're there on the sidelines. There's a team from somewhere else. Your kids are playing together. You might end up talking to those other parents.
Right.
And that stuff usually tends to happen in a place like a park or public space.
Right.
So I think those kind of like natural connections. And then there's also stuff that like, I feel like brings people together for something that they're all interested in. So there's that point of connection.
Right.
Like a concert. In a park, or a festival, or a chili cook-off. Like you're all there because you love chili.
Yes, yes.
So it doesn't matter where you're from or how much money you make. You're eating chili and enjoying the day. Right. So
so whether it's like activism or just cultural events, community events, right? Those are all good spaces for people to come together, and that strengthens a community.
Yeah.
Like I think like that is a big thing about like the human element, right? Is like experiencing people who are different from you, and so to sort of like broaden your horizons in terms of the way that you think about things, right?
Right. It's like you get to know other folks in your community.
Yeah.
You get to meet your neighbors.
Yep.
Hopefully, I hope in that process, like you kind of like drop off some of those like judgments or,
Sure.
or preconceived notions or, whatever it is.
Yep.
You get to meet real people.
Yeah. Now, what about for people who may not be the outdoorsy type, right? I would say the first 2 decades of my life, I was not an outdoorsy person. I didn't get a lot from being outside, and that was probably something that I struggled with. That was like things that I was struggling with mentally at the time, which turned into me being a little bit more of a recluse or like, an inside type of person at that time in my life. But can we explain to those people who are like, oh, I would never go to a park or, like how does it foster your everyday well-being more than just the things that we just talked about, right?
Yeah. So first I want to say that I have a colleague who said to me, and I work in like the outdoors realm, and most people who work in parks come from this background of like mountain climbing.
Okay.
They're like into
that's like extreme outdoors.
Yes, like they're in it for like the environmental reasons.
Right.
And everybody should be able to go hiking, and like here I am, I'm like, people should be healthy. But I have one colleague who's like, I am now not outdoorsy. She's like, I am outsidey.
Okay.
Like, outsidey. Tell me more.
Okay. And that's different than outdoorsy?
It's So she explained it to me as different than outdoorsy. Like, I don't think I'm outdoorsy. I will be happy if I never sleep in a tent again. Like, I'm cool with that.
Okay. Yeah.
But she's outsidey. Like, she has a garden.
Yeah.
That she likes alone. To go outside.
Right.
And, work in the garden.
Right.
Or take a walk or walk the dog.
Right. That doesn't mean a 5-mile hike up a mountain.
Right, exactly. You don't need to go to REI.
Right.
Totally
spend hundreds of dollars on equipment, right? It could just be sitting outside in a park and reading a book, right?
Absolutely.
Tending to your garden, walking around your yard.
Going for a walk with your friend.
Yeah.
But like in the most basic way that I think about this is like, okay, let's say you have to go run some errands.
Yeah.
You can go to the strip mall that's like all concrete.
Great.
Right?
Yep.
And go to like Best Buy or Dollar Store or whatever. You could go to the mall that's all fluorescent lighting.
Yep.
Or you could go to like Garden City, which right now is about to have daffodils and tulips and blooming trees.
Yes.
And even though it sucks to park,
yeah.
once you're out of your car, it's actually kind of nice.
It is kind of nice, yeah. It's funny you say that. I'm going there tonight for my brother's birthday. Nice. Yes, Garden City tonight. Well,
you'll have to let me know if the tulips are up.
I will.
So
I'll let you know. Yeah. And it is nice. Like this time of year, especially in New England, is such like a reinvigorating time, right? You see those crocuses popping up. You see the daffodils popping up, and it is a sign of of outdoor life that is like, oh, we're finally through the thick of it, right? Another year of it, right? I mean, most of us, if you've lived in New England your whole life, it's that same cycle every single year. But there's a part in February and early March that you're like, oh my. The doldrums of winter.
When I see a crocus.
Yes. It's amazing. Yeah, right. We did it. It is like a big we did it moment. But I think, I'm sure most people who are like listening to this podcast and ride bikes, they understand what being outside does for themselves, right? But they might not understand like how it can, like we're talking about, really bring people together, especially in a park, right? Because like you said, you're going to see people that you might not normally see, especially if like you're just doing things inside. You talk about shopping in a strip mall or shopping in a fluorescent mall. What about people who just shop online?
Right.
People are busy, and shopping online is a very, valuable tool, and I'm sure we all do it. I do it, Yeah. But there is something about going out and experiencing the world in a nice space, even if it is Garden City, which is like, consumerism to the max, but it still is a lot nicer than going and walking around a mall or just like a concrete jungle. And there's all of these different ways of experiencing the outdoors, whether it be the extreme of hiking or something like you're just sitting, in a park or around the gazebo in Garden City, right? And because it's nice out. I also think those places, right, we talked about, they're considered, public parks are often considered one of the last like truly democratic spaces, right? Because they're accessible to all, they're free of charge. And I sort of talked about activism and cultural events, which is a big reason why I'm doing this ride, because of like the current presidential administration just like bogging down all these different things. But like, how do we see public parks playing a role in like civic engagement in our communities?
Yeah, so I think first is if you need a place to organize a movement,
Yeah.
you have a park. Like,
Right.
you don't need to pay to get in. It doesn't have a political affiliation. It doesn't have opinions. You know,
Right.
like you can bring people together in a park and it's a
Right.
pretty safe space.
Yeah.
And it's legal, like you're not doing anything wrong.
Right.
And I just think it just kind of has that feeling of like, let's get to meet in the park.
Right.
It makes sense to people. I think it's convenient. It's a way to get people out. And I think of examples even of like where this has happened.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that I always think about is Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech was on the National Mall.
Yeah.
Like, that's a park.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And even like, and I think a park is a good space that, you know, say you're going to gather for something, right? No matter what side that you're on, it also offers the opportunity for people to counter what that idea is,
Yep.
right? And so, like you said, there's no affiliation.
Yep.
And so it could be several groups of
You're going to
people.
get both sides.
Right. Right. And that's what's very nice about it is it isn't like, oh, this is only for people who think this way. It's like, okay, no, we're going to gather for this. And, you know, there might be protesters. There might be people who have counter arguments. But that is a way of like growing as a society. This is what I believe. What do you believe? And as long as it's civil,
Right.
which a lot of the times it isn't, unfortunately. But as long as it is civil and it is like, you know, sharing that human element of like, hey, this is what I think and why I think it. If we can connect on that way, because I feel like there's such a pro sports, like anti, you know what I mean? It's like it turns into like teams and versus so much these days. But when it comes to people like us, it should be about us, you know, hearing out each other and understanding where each other are coming from, you know, because, you know, individuals, we really can't make that much of a change. But when we gather in a group and we hear like why people think the way that they do and can be enlightened on new viewpoints, like that's very, you know, I think that's great. That's great for everyone involved. It's very empowering, right? And so not only does it help, I think, with that like civic engagement, but like you said, the historical examples of like things like Martin Luther King on the National Mall, like that is extremely empowering. And like that can happen in any sort of park. I mean, obviously the National Mall is huge and it can accommodate that many people. But hey, you just want to get together and like talk with people about something in a park. Like it is really easy just to be like, hey, this is a space. We can all hang out. It can be relatively innocent. It can be, we're really trying to, you know, enlighten you about something. And like it really sort of goes all across the board, you know?
Yeah, there's this one, I just learned about this year actually, or last year, and it's out in LA, so on the whole other side of the world, but LA's got a lot of development going on and a lot of like displacement happening.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's a group that organizes this event called National Black Walnut Day.
Okay.
And it is a celebration of the native black walnut tree, which is, I guess, a symbol of like native resilience.
Oh, okay.
And it's a cultural event / peaceful protest.
Yep.
So they bring people together in this park. They do all kinds of cultural events, like they make black walnut dye.
Oh, wow.
They have food. They do nature walks. They do storytelling. There's like naturalists there doing stuff. And at the same time, they are really educating people about the value of maintaining and preserving that land, not giving it over to big development, making sure the people that live around it still get the benefits of that land and don't get kicked out.
Right.
So it's like they bring people into the park, you know, under this, like you're going to get a nature hike and good food.
Yeah.
And you're going to leave with a whole bunch of new information about why it's so important. Like, we really need you to step up and protect this land too. So I think it, you know, parks can also be eye-opening, I guess, in that way. You know, they had a mission to educate people and to make sure they bring in more advocates and more people on their side, and kind of using the park to do that.
And now, you know, talking about all those benefits, what about like some of the threats that public parks face today? You know, like whether it be like lack of funding or privatization or accessibility, you know, because I do think that the current administration is, you know, like they're talking about Trump's like, oh, the national parks, we're gonna take back the land so we can help the housing crisis in America, which, I mean, is just an absolutely backwards way of going about things. But it's clear that there are threats to those
Yes.
public spaces, right? Whether they become privatized or funding goes away, you know, like that's a big thing right now with like the national parks, right? Is like they've let people go. People who might be like full time have been you know, sort of let's say dumbed down to part time roles, and that means that like the space might not be as cleanly as it was, you know, as much as people who use the space should be, you know, carrying in and carrying out. That doesn't always happen. Yeah. And those park service members, those rangers are there to like not only help give you information, but help clean up and like help point people in the right direction.
Some of our first responders.
Right.
So like.
Right. And that's what you want. Like
right.
You want someone that like I have not been to many national parks. I went to Acadia for the first time last summer, and it absolutely blew my mind. I truly was blown away, so much so that I was like, I need to come back here as often as I can. The price point was great. The people were so helpful. And like you said, they can be someone that is like, oh, that's an aspen tree, but they're also a first responder
right.
and everything in between, right? And so like the knowledge that they give and the safety that they provide, and that is being threatened, right? And so are there any other sort of, other than, you know, money being taken away from these causes, what road, not to be too negative about it, but like what road does that lead us towards if they start, you know, defunding these things more and privatizing these places more?
Yeah, so I think first, like, kind of important to understand that parks are funded through a variety of ways.
Yes.
But a lot of that funding is federal funding. So there's like the national parks, but then there's also like the parks down the street from you.
Right.
That's still federal funding.
Right.
You know, that comes to the state. The state sends that out to the community. So any big federal cuts are going to impact like the park that's in your community.
Right.
So that's one. I think the thing that I worry about is, I guess I don't really understand like where the priorities are going to lie. So we know parks have value. Like we just talked about, parks have value to humans for health.
Right.
Parks have value to the environment. There's a lot of environmental reasons that you want green space. Parks have a lot of economic value. Like, all right, White Mountain National Forest. Like I'm sure you've been up there.
Absolutely.
Can you imagine if that wasn't there? The restaurants, the businesses, the hotels, the ski resorts, the outdoor providers, like that space, that forest is a huge generator of economic stuff.
Yeah.
So parks have that value.
Right.
But then that land also has value for, I don't know, oil, minerals, trees, housing, other development. So like what?
Right. How do you balance it?
How are we going to define value? Because I feel like for a long time it's been parks are great. These, you know, parks, forests, trails, spaces, public lands, we're going to protect and preserve them. But now it's like, oh, but we need them, I don't know, to pay off debt, whatever it is.
Right. Right.
So that scares me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's not the kind of thing that you can reverse, you know?
Right.
And like I said, like, is the priority going to be the people or is the priority going to be the development? And if you think about like, if I said to you, what do you really love about the community that you live in? Think about like what makes it great, what makes it special. You're probably going to have an image of something that happened outside.
Right.
You know, I have memories of my kids in the park, bike rides, going to a concert.
Yeah.
I could ask that question of a million people and no one's going to say, you know what I love about my community? Mining.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Like, I love deforestation.
Yes. I love it when they take down the trees.
Yes. I love this, you know, massive development.
Yeah. The construction. Right.
So like we know where people lie, you know, we know that everybody really wants their natural spaces, but is there going to be a push to sell them off for money or to mine them?
Like that seems to be the scary part.
Because once it's gone, it's gone. Like you don't get to reverse that.
Yeah, exactly. It is relatively quick to tear something down, but to build something up like that, like the White Mountain National Forest, right? I mean, my wife and I go up to North Conway almost every summer because I like to ride the Kank, and we both spent our childhoods there, you know, going up, taking trips. And like you said, like there are those two towns on either side of the Kankomangas Highway, Lincoln, New Hampshire, and North Conway, New Hampshire, that are so well funded by winter trips, summer trips,
Yeah.
people enjoying the outdoors, right? That like there's so much influx of money that happens during those peak seasons, which two very different seasons in the White Mountains,
Yeah.
you know, like you're near Mount Washington, which is you know, a wild climate swing and some of the craziest changes up there in the winter. And in the summer you can go and you can like sit in a river and that's all free. All absolutely free. I mean, sure, staying in the hotels isn't free and going to those restaurants isn't free, but that shouldn't be.
But you go for a hike for free,
Yes,
right? Like
right.
maybe you rent a kayak.
Yeah. Or you pay like $4 to park
Yeah.
in like a really nice, you know, parking lot that has been maintained and is clean and has marked trailheads
Yeah.
and, you know, things that like park rangers are upkeeping and, you know, making sure that there's the right information so that when you go out there, you know, hopefully you have some awareness and you know what you're getting yourself into, right? But that comes with the support from the community, you know. And we also you talked about the environmental impact, right? I mean, taking down a bunch of trees is not going to be good for the environment. And parks, you know, they play roles in combating climate change, like particularly in urban areas. I was looking at this study where, you know, they were just looking at a specific block in Manhattan, right, that didn't have trees. And they were just looking at like the ambient temperature of that space and how much higher it is than a very similar space that just the road is lined with trees, right? Because of the shade that it provides, the amount of cooling that it provides, it makes it a space that even in an urban environment like Manhattan with tons of people, so densely populated, it's a space that you want to be outside a little bit more because of some trees, right? Yeah. Now, whether that's the shade or hearing birds, right? Like that, experiencing wildlife, that all is reassuring. And like, you know, I do think, like, there was just something that happened in Rhode Island here where some developer off 95 and Elmwood Ave, they cut down a bunch of trees. Did you see that?
No.
Happened within the last 48 hours. Elmwood Ave,
okay.
95 exit. It's, you know, some corporation that's been hired to fix I think it's the same company that's supposed to fix the bridge, the Washington Bridge. They cleared out a bunch of trees that in the proposal they were not supposed to clear out. It was like 100-year-old forest in the middle of like a roundabout off of Elmwood Ave. And they were like, oh, we're not, you know, the plans showed that they weren't going to take it down. Well, they did take it down. And in turn, it was cheaper for them to take down all the trees and pay the fine than it was for them to appropriately plan and keep the trees up. Wow. And so now they're talking about how this area might be prone to flooding. And obviously there were tons of like animals, you know, bugs and stuff that lived there. And this is a tough time of year for like emerging insects, right? A lot of people are sort of obsessed with their lawns and they take their leaves away and they cut down their tall grasses and stuff. But those are places that like bugs live, right? The bugs live in there all winter. They stay protected all winter. And now on these days where it's like sort of breaches 50 degrees, they're coming out a little bit more. But if they're hibernating and you cut down those grasses, that's really not good. And you know, pollinators have been at risk for a long time because of stuff like this. And that those green spaces, they're maintaining biodiversity, right? Because like you don't want to it shouldn't just all be humans. That's not why the earth is the way that it is, not just because of humans, right? I mean, all of the different elements that are from the bottom of the food chain all the way up to the top are important in our society, you know? So what about the importance of green spaces in like protecting local ecosystems, you know?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, they're good for air.
Yeah.
They filter water.
Yep.
You know, so there's less pollution in the rivers and streams and the ocean and cool the temperatures and everything. Pollinators need pollen or we don't get food.
Right.
You know, it probably wasn't until my kids were in school and learning, I don't know, it was probably like science or whatever. It was probably like second grade where everything is super simple. My husband, my son bringing home this worksheet that was like, kind of like the ecosystem.
Yeah.
You know, and it was like, the bees take the pollen and bring it to the whatever, like all this stuff happens and then the squirrels do this and like, like, wow,
Right, at
that's
every
a pretty
level.
intricate system that has just been happening all around us that I totally wasn't even aware of.
Right.
So we need that stuff.
Yeah, right. And I think, and it's okay, like, maybe it's not okay to take it for granted, but that's part of why life is the way that it is, right?
Yep.
And so the more that we take away those spaces, the more that we are sort of, threatening the status quo of where we're at with climate change, with just the ecosystem in general. So looking ahead, right? Obviously, trying to raise funds for this Pedal for Progress thing. But to me, as much as I'm proud of it and I love to do it, it's sort of a drop in the bucket, right? I'm trying to raise $5,000, split up between the two causes. It's helpful, but it's not the end to a means, right? So what about some like policies or initiatives, that you believe would have like the greatest impact in expanding and protecting public parks? Is it as simple as just going to your park? Should we be calling our state senators? Should we be, what can we do as individuals, to make sure that these spaces continue to thrive, and maybe even we can like source more spaces and protect more spaces? What can we do?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say first, if you have the opportunity, if you're a person who is like, I think the outdoors are important, get yourself on like your parks board.
Okay.
Or whatever that structure is in your community, or natural resources, or like something where you have a say in what happens locally.
Right.
So, definitely get involved with that kind of stuff. And also pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on like right in your community. You want to build housing? There's no reason why parks and housing cannot coexist, and in fact should coexist.
Right.
If you want to create healthy housing, like there's all this work going on around healthy housing, making sure that it's, free of contaminants and air quality and all that. It should also have green space.
Yeah.
So if you learn of development happening in your community, think about the green space, think about the pedestrian access, like think about all those things. Right. And then also I think, just at the bigger level, there's always petitions to sign, right?
Yep.
There's always ways to donate. I think being vocal and not letting stuff just slide.
Right.
So, like I said, I want to think most people support natural spaces, and if it came down to it, I think people would not want to see, our big public lands shrunken and taken away. Right. But you have to do something. Like
you can't just hope that
you can't just hope that it's not going to happen. Right. So if it comes down to that, I think people do need to be vocal and need to say something and sign the petitions, write the letters, tag the people on social, like let them know that you're watching. Right.
Yeah, to me that's sort of the biggest thing, is being more vocal and being more active, right? Because that idea of just hoping that things are going to, be okay. Yeah. Sometimes that might work. Right now it's not the time.
Sometimes it's probably not going to work.
Yeah.
And I think too, I think most people and most policymakers are going to say parks are great.
Yeah.
We love our parks. Right. Yay, parks.
Right.
I think most people know that they're good for recreation. They're probably good places to hang out. I'm not sure. And they're probably good for like climate change or the environment. Like those are probably well understood things.
Right.
I don't know if everybody understands like how good parks are for the economy.
Yeah.
And that's important. How good parks are for housing, for attracting businesses and residents. Like, especially now where hopefully this doesn't change too, but like where people can work from home. Yeah. You can decide where you want to live. Right. Right? Like you don't have to live in a community that you don't like. You can move to a place. Right. And you're probably picking a place that has like a decent cost of living and stuff for you to do and seems like a nice place to be. And usually that's a place with like amenities like parks, with stuff like parks. Right. So I think, letting people know that parks really do have this value that we can't just count it off as like, oh, the parks are nice, but they're not important. They're like critically important. Right.
They're critically important in the grand scheme of things, and also on the individual level. Yes. Right. And so it's like all in between, like speaking personally, I lived in San Diego, and at that time in my life, I was an unhealthy person. I weighed a lot more, and I lived very close to Balboa Park which is this huge public space in San Diego. It's where San Diego Zoo is. The zoo is located inside the park, but there's trails, there's places to hike, there's places to mountain bike, there's like 2 Frisbee golf courses. There are beautiful museums that are free to go into.
Oh, wow.
And it was a place that legitimately changed the trajectory of my life. My wife and I became members at the zoo because like it was relatively cheap to become a member as opposed to like a one day. It was like if you paid enough to go like 2 days a year.
Yeah, it pays itself.
It pays itself. And then it meant with that membership, when people came to town, when our family and our friends came to visit, we could take them to the zoo for free. And it was a place that we legitimately would go to probably 3+ times a week just to walk around. And that was a big thing for me. Like I was not really that active of a person, and I decided to make a change. And in making that change, I was like, I want to spend more time outside, more time walking. And it was just as simple as going for walks at the zoo, right? And you think about it, it's the zoo, and so there's money behind it. But the San Diego Zoo is pretty good. They're good for conservation, and they have a big safari park out somewhere else where like the animals can really roam free. And that was a big I couldn't believe how beautiful the space was. Like there's this huge fig tree that must have been 100 years old that provided so much shade and so much of like a biodiversity just in that one tree, right? Think about all the critters that are living in the tree, the birds, the squirrels, the bugs. And then people, it had to have been like 100 square feet under the tree that you could just sit in the shade, right? And that was just one tree, which was like a beautiful, beautiful thing. And to think about how that like exponentially is so much bigger when you look on like the grand scheme of things, right? So from an individual personal perspective to like, hey, more trees, more green spaces, I'm not saying everything needs to be trees and we all need to like be hermits or anything, right? Like, and we like no one should shop online or anything, but it needs to be a balance.
Absolutely.
And that to me is like being, the human element. There's a lot that we have done to sort of make the world what it is today. And if we can use that influence to make sure that people can still spend time outside in easily accessible, free spaces, right? Physical health, mental health, it's huge. And as soon as they start to like privatize those things, and like you said, most people probably want to have that green space, right? But unfortunately, there are some individuals that are in charge, and that doesn't matter to them as much as like their bank account matters, right? And so they're like, oh, we're gonna sell all this land to like build housing. But then they're like the same people that are like shutting down new communities and like the town next door, because like they don't want it in their backyard type of thing, So it's like, oh, the middle of Utah, who cares? What do you mean who cares? Like it's all part of like, what the American dream was, or like what it used to be, right? Like this big, vast national park system. And going to Acadia for the first time last year, I was like, I want to go to every national park. Like that was a big thing that we said, my wife and I, when we were leaving, like we want to go to every single national park and just to experience like the different ecosystems, the different outdoor, untouched spaces, right? And so, like you said, we can advocate, right? We can show up to whether it be town hall meetings or join sort of different like land trusts that are all over, right? Like I know there's like right? Like is it about like donating money? Is it just about speaking out? Like what do you think like a key takeaway you want listeners or viewers of the show to remember about the importance of parks and how they can like, do things to like really make them stay,
Yeah, I think, like I said, pay attention and be active. Like make sure you say something. Is it good to donate? Absolutely. Like, yes. Pick an organization that's doing some good work in conservation, like National Parks Conservation
or even donate your time.
Right. Yes,
it doesn't need to be donating money, right?
Yeah.
Like they need people to call senators.
Yes.
Right? Hey, who do you want me to call? Right? It doesn't need to be your senator. Right? It doesn't need to be your state senator or your like anything like that. You could say, hey, we're not getting enough calls in Nebraska. Let's make more calls in Nebraska. Right? Like that is a very empowering way. I think so. So Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. Any other ways, like any other like key takeaways for people?
I think just that also that idea of shifting the perception that parks are like a bonus.
Yeah.
They're not a bonus. Like
Right.
they're pretty critical.
Yeah.
And all land, whether it's park or trail or, protected public land, it serves a purpose, like you said, for the individual, for the community, for the economy. So I think, making sure that we realize that when we're talking about parks, we're not just talking about like a feel-good thing.
Right.
They're actually important.
Right. It's not something to be taken for granted, for sure. I think that's interesting that you say, it's not a bonus. It should just be a part of life, being able to have access to outdoor space, right? Especially if you're someone that lives, in a 3-story house with a family above you and below you, right? And like you're in a congested space, and that might be fine for living, but to be able to go out to a place like that you can just sit and enjoy the sun's rays is huge, right?
I mean, think about Providence. So there's a lot of housing in Providence where years ago they converted the yards to parking spaces because like people had more cars.
Right.
And, a 2-family home became a 3-family home and you needed more parking.
Right.
So there's tons of places in Providence where people don't have yards.
Right.
But Providence has, I think, like 99 to 100% park access. So almost everybody lives within a 10-minute walk of a park in Providence.
Nice. Yeah.
Quality of park may be a little bit different, and that's like their priority is to figure out how to make sure everybody lives within a quality, within a walk of a quality space.
Right.
But if they didn't have that, there'd be people that did not have access to green space.
Right.
It would be pavement and asphalt.
Right.
So
I lived in an apartment at one time that was the backyard was converted to full parking.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it went from like it was 2 units, and then they added a 3rd unit, and so
and
they were
everybody's
like,
got cars.
yeah, so it's like, well, we need space for 6 cars instead of 4, and so what are we going to do? I mean, and it was a small green space, not much bigger than the room that we're sitting in now, but that turned into a paved lot, and that was just one apartment building, right?
Yeah.
And Providence is sort of famous for parking lots.
Parking, yes.
There's parking everywhere. There's a housing crisis in this state and in the city of Providence, and there are parking lots like around every corner. And that was a big thing, like when they sort of like rerouted 195, and then they took buildings down and stuff, and those are still all parking lots. That they're not full all the time. There's a lot of street parking in the city. And, there are a lot of cases of people like saying, hey, we're going to build, accessible housing here. And then some folks are like, no, you can't do that here. That's actually happening in the town of Johnston next door. Someone bought a piece of property and they decided that they wanted to they through sort of state funding and like they're getting some tax breaks, but they wanted to build low income housing. And people who don't want it showed up in droves to the sort of the town council. They're like, no, these are not in my backyard people, and who are you to say that like, and I understand like you don't want like these big changes in traffic or big changes in congestion, right? But the alternative to this space, they're talking about putting low income housing. The town of Johnston wants to put in a municipal safety space. So they want to house the main fire engines there, the main police station there. What is the environmental impact on that? Like, it's not like there's going to be no traffic if it's a safety complex, right? As opposed to, I mean, I know there are studies done by people much smarter than me that are like, oh, there will be more traffic if it's a public safety complex versus a residential space that has 17 apartments.
Oh, so not like 100.
No, not like 100. And like it might be closer to 100, but from what I've read, and because this is the town next door, it seems like the studies that have been done are saying like you might think that you have the right idea in mind by putting this public safety complex instead of this, but the roads are going to become more congested. There's going to be, noise pollution. There's going to be general traffic, and that will affect a community in such a different way. And we're not even talking about parks at this point, right? We're just talking about people who have these agendas that like they think are right, but they're sort of misinformed because like it's in their backyard, right? And so it's as much as it sucks that like, oh, Zion or Bryce Canyon might be affected, there are things that are happening literally where you are. And as someone that is trying to be more, vocal with the way that I think the world should be, right, and trying to affect the change that like I want to see in the world, I don't want to get involved in politics. That sounds obnoxious, but more so than ever, I'm like, okay, maybe I should at least like attend a town meeting, and just become informed, because that information is empowering. And then you can make a decision that is like, actually, you've been informed by these people who really know what they're talking about, as opposed to like, getting on Reddit and complaining about, right. Something that's happening, because it's like relatively negative. And I think there are a lot of people that sort of are advocates like just on social media. And that to me is a little bit damning, because we all sort of like live in our own echo chamber, right? And like the people that follow me on social media are probably very like-minded individuals, and like the algorithm shows
right.
them.
Right, you're in your bubble.
To me, you're in your bubble, right? And so to get outside that bubble, whether it be at a town council meeting or just by going to something at a park where you're with and around different people, that is empowering, and that is the type of change, right, that I think that we should be striving for.
Yeah, I mean, totally, like, no matter what the data says, but like, there's going to be data. People are going to have to listen to data at a town council meeting, or like decision makers, your policymakers are going to have to like look at that data.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, like, squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yes.
So if 4 people show up to say no and 35 people show up to say yes, they're going to get heard probably more than the 4. So, even if you don't want to get involved in politics, like sometimes there's very little that you have to do.
Yeah.
Most communities have some kind of like Friends of Parks sort of group.
Okay.
Get involved in a Friends of Parks group.
Yeah.
They're going to be like planting stuff and cleaning stuff, but those are the people that know what's going on in the parks. And they're the ones that can kind of let you know, like, hey, this thing is happening. I just need you to show up.
Right.
They're going to give you the talking points.
Right.
You don't have to do a whole lot of work, but just to be able to stand up at a meeting and say, like, I really hope you'll consider not doing that, because this is the impact it's going to have on me and my community, my kids, my family, and, people that come after us.
Right. Yeah, one person standing up for that versus 30 is a lot.
It makes
a
big
better.
difference.
Even if one person is the person doing the majority of the talking, right? It doesn't mean that you need to be this person that like is all of a sudden very vocal and boisterous, right? I agree. I'm here because I agree with what Eliza's saying, right? And that's big, right? Just to show that support. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything that you feel that we didn't go over here that you just want to chat about before we end the show? Anything on your notes over there? I think we've sort of covered all the questions.
I just have to say I'm impressed. I didn't realize your story was you went from walking to now you're going to get on your bike for 500 miles.
Yes, that's right. I was very out of shape. I weighed like 250 pounds, and I spent 5 days a week at comedy clubs. I did stand-up comedy for a long time, and I would drill cigarettes outside and like drink, and I don't partake in some of those things anymore. I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. I don't drink alcohol. I don't spend nearly as much time at comedy clubs as much as I might love it. But to me, actually, COVID was like a big thing. I very much was a cycling COVID baby, as they would say.
Really?
Like I sort of was into it tangentially. My dad always loved it, which when I was really young was a reason for me not to like it because of my relationship with my father. That is a lot better these days. And I have grown to love cycling in a way. But yeah, I mean, it very much was like, I didn't spend any time outside. And now I sort of, for lack of a better term, go crazy if I don't find the time outside because it has helped my mental health so much. To me, it was the mental health first.
Yep.
Improving myself mentally allowed me to improve myself physically. And that was the biggest thing.
And that's a cycle too,
Absolutely.
right? So it's like, and then because I do feel like with the physical stuff, like you see that you accomplished something.
Yes.
And that kind of reinforces like the positive mental spin on
gives
stuff.
you those endorphins that help you mentally, and then that helps you to want to strive more. So I am no way saying that someone needs to go out and ride 500 miles in 5 days or anything like that, right? But it's just understanding the importance of things like parks and being outside, or things like everyone having equal value and valuing humans for just being human, right? And not sort of being demeaning to any certain groups of people is a big thing in society today. And there are so many people with really loud voices that are speaking out against that. And so, yeah, I mean, even if it's just this little podcast or one bike ride, it's sort of the step in the right direction. And if this conversation even just empowers us to be more active, hopefully it empowers others who are listening or watching. But I mean, hearing from you, someone who has actually like read the studies and is not just like tangential evidence, has been very helpful. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for your donation. Just been like super helpful in this. I think even like the first day before I even knew how we were going to raise money for it, right? I sort of put on social media, hey, how can I do this in a way that makes sense? And you were like, I'm not really sure, but I do know, I know about public spaces. And so that was great. So really, I thank you for reaching out and for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'm going to say, like, go to a park, go meet people, be kind to them.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's nice. Yeah. Yes. Go out to a park and be kind to people.
Yes.
I think
I think the world would be a better place.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much, Eliza. Appreciate it.
you.
Yep. See ya.
We are It's Just a Hill, a cycling club that promotes inclusion, judgment-free, with no gatekeepers. Focused on creating content from behind the handlebars to in the studio, It's Just a Hill is producing videos and podcasts to spread the message that cycling is for everyone. We are focused on reminding everyone that riding your bike can help you overcome any obstacle, because after all, it's just a hill.
Decaf left, regular right. Decaf left, regular right. It's very challenging work.